You were not born into a world of relationships. You were born into a world of positions. Every person in your life, colleague, friend, family member, partner, occupies a position relative to yours. And every position carries either alignment or friction. What most people call a difficult person or a complicated situation is, in the language of power, simply a threat that has not yet been properly classified. That is where the first failure happens, not in the response, in the diagnosis. The modern mind has been conditioned to resist this framing. You have been taught, through religion, therapy culture, social conditioning, that labeling someone a threat is paranoid, aggressive, uncivilized. You were handed a vocabulary of grace. Give them the benefit of the doubt. Set a boundary. Communicate your feelings. Assume positive intent. And you used that vocabulary. And the threat remained, because threats do not care about your vocabulary. Here is the first principle of the doctrine. A threat identified, but not resolved, is a threat you have consented to. Read that again. When you became aware that someone was working against your interests, your reputation, your position, your resources, your peace of mind, and you chose patience or diplomacy or distance, you did not neutralize anything. You broadcast a frequency. You told that person without words exactly how far they can go before consequences arrive. And if no consequences arrived, they recalibrated. They went further. They always go further. This is not a theory about bad people. This is a theory about incentive structures. People push because pushing works. They undermine because undermining goes unanswered. They escalate because the first 5 escalations cost them nothing. You did not fail to stop them because you were kind. You failed to stop them because you were operating from a framework that was never designed to protect you. It was designed to make you manageable. Machiavelli understood this in the 15th century with a clarity most people in the 21st century still cannot access. In The Prince, he did not write about enemies with malice. He wrote about enemies with architecture. He described the political landscape the way a surgeon describes tissue, without sentiment, without hesitation, with complete commitment to the outcome. His conclusion was not that men are evil. His conclusion was that the world selects against softness, not occasionally, systematically, perpetually. The lion does not negotiate with the threat. The lion identifies the threat, closes the distance, and ends it. What you call ruthlessness, nature calls efficiency. Now apply this lens to your own life. Think about the last person who threatened your position. In the workplace, in your social circle, in a relationship. Walk back the timeline. When did it start? Likely small. A comment that landed wrong. A subtle act of undermining, disguised as humor. A loyalty that shifted without announcement. You noticed. You processed. You may have even confronted. But you did not eliminate the threat. You managed it. And here you are, months or years later, still managing it, or dealing with the wreckage of having waited too long. That pattern ends with this doctrine. This video is not about anger. It is not about revenge. Anger is amateur. Revenge is emotional. What you are about to receive is a strategic architecture for identifying, classifying, and permanently removing threats from your environment with the cold efficiency of someone who has decided that their sovereignty is non-negotiable. The first step was the lens shift. You are not dealing with difficult people. You are dealing with unresolved threats. Name them correctly and the path forward becomes clinical. Everything else follows from here. Your instincts were not built for the modern threat landscape. They were built for the savannah, for predators you could see, hear, and outrun. The biological architecture you inherited, the fight-or-flight response, the social bonding mechanism, the threat detection system was calibrated for a world where danger announced itself, where the enemy had teeth you could count. The enemies you face now do not announce themselves. They smile at your face and architect your removal in your absence. And your ancient nervous system, scanning for visible predators, registers nothing. You feel fine while you are being dismantled. This is the first mechanism you must understand: the appeasement loop. When a modern threat presents itself, subtle, socially coded, wrapped in plausible deniability, your nervous system does not trigger a clean fight response. It triggers something far more dangerous. It triggers the desire to resolve the discomfort, to smooth it over, to make the friction disappear through warmth, through explanation, through extending goodwill. Psychologists call this the fawn response. In the language of power, it has a simpler name: an offering. When you appease a threat, you are not calming the situation. You are feeding it intelligence. You are revealing what you value, what you fear losing, and how much social pain you will absorb before you act. Every act of appeasement is a data point your threat is cataloging. They now know your threshold. They now know your ceiling, and they will operate precisely 1 inch below it, indefinitely, because you have demonstrated that is the cost of doing business with you. The second mechanism is what makes this even more dangerous: social conditioning as a weapon. Your instincts were not built for the modern threat landscape. They were built for the savannah, for predators you could see, hear, and outrun. The biological architecture you inherited, the fight-or-flight response, the social bonding mechanism, the threat detection system was calibrated for a world where danger announced itself, where the enemy had teeth you could count. The enemies you face now do not announce themselves. They smile at your face and architect your removal in your absence. And your ancient nervous system, scanning for visible predators, registers nothing. You feel fine while you are being dismantled. This is the first mechanism you must understand: the appeasement loop. When a modern threat presents itself, subtle, socially coded, wrapped in plausible deniability, your nervous system does not trigger a clean fight response. It triggers something far more dangerous. It triggers the desire to resolve the discomfort, to smooth it over, to make the friction disappear through warmth, through explanation, through extending goodwill. Psychologists call this the fawn response. In the language of power, it has a simpler name: an offering. When you appease a threat, you are not calming the situation. You are feeding it intelligence. You are revealing what you value, what you fear losing, and how much social pain you will absorb before you act. Every act of appeasement is a data point your threat is cataloging. They now know your threshold. They now know your ceiling, and they will operate precisely 1 inch below it, indefinitely, because you have demonstrated that is the cost of doing business with you. The second mechanism is what makes this even more dangerous: social conditioning as a weapon. Most people lose power conflicts not because they lack strength, but because they misidentify what they are fighting. They bring diplomacy to a sabotage campaign. They bring confrontation to a slow erosion operation. They respond to the visible behavior and miss the underlying architecture entirely. Misdiagnosis is not a minor error in a power conflict. It is a terminal one. There are 4 distinct threat archetypes. Each operates through a different mechanism. Each requires a different elimination protocol. Learn to identify them on contact, because the longer you misread what you are dealing with, the more ground you surrender. Archetype 1, the Underminer. The Underminer does not attack you directly. Direct attack carries risk. It can be identified, confronted, and socially penalized. The Underminer operates through precision erosion. A comment positioned as humor, a question framed as concern, a compliment architectured to carry doubt inside it. You did great, considering how little time you had. The damage lands. The accountability evaporates. The Underminer's primary target is not your resources or your position. It is your perceived credibility. They are slowly editing the story that others hold about you, one interaction at a time, in rooms you are not in. By the time the damage is visible, the campaign has been running for months. The elimination protocol for an Underminer is not confrontation. Confrontation validates them and makes you appear reactive. The protocol is narrative seizure, systematically and strategically controlling the story before they can edit it. You will learn exactly how in Chapter 5. Archetype 2, the Ally Converter. This is the most dangerous archetype because it operates inside your own network. The Ally Converter does not come for you directly. They come for the people around you. They invest in your relationships, your colleagues, your social circle, your inner ring, and slowly reposition themselves as the more valuable, more reliable, more aligned presence. They are not stealing from you. They are rerouting loyalty away from you, one relationship at a time. The signal is subtle. People who were once warm begin to feel slightly distant. Conversations that once flowed begin to carry a new, almost imperceptible friction. You have not done anything wrong, but someone has been quietly doing something strategic. The Ally Converter's power comes entirely from your network. Sever their access to it, and they are disarmed completely. Archetype 3, the Erosion Agent. Where the Underminer targets credibility and the Ally Converter targets your network, the Erosion Agent targets something deeper, your psychological stability. Their weapon is manufactured uncertainty. They create environments of chronic low-level stress, inconsistency, ambiguity, subtle unpredictability, designed to keep you slightly off balance at all times. An off-balance person makes poor decisions. An off-balance person second-guesses their own reads. An off-balance person is easier to maneuver. The Erosion Agent rarely escalates. They do not need to. The accumulated psychological weight of their presence does the work for them. The elimination protocol here is environmental, not direct engagement, but complete removal of their ability to access your psychological state. Archetype 4, the Open Predator. This is the archetype most people wrongly prepare for, while ignoring the first 3. The Open Predator is direct, visible, and aggressive. They challenge you openly, compete with you transparently, and make no effort to disguise their intentions. In one sense, they are the least dangerous of the 4, because they are readable. The danger with the Open Predator is not their aggression. It is the tendency to overcommit resources, fighting them visibly, while the other 3 archetypes operate freely in the background. The Open Predator is sometimes a distraction deployed deliberately. Treat them efficiently, economically, and without theater. Save your full architecture for the threats you cannot see. The diagnostic rule. Before any response, before any move, classify first. Ask 3 questions. Who is being targeted? My credibility, my network, my psychology, or my position directly? The answer tells you the archetype. The archetype tells you the protocol. The protocol removes the emotion from the equation entirely. You are not dealing with people anymore. You are dealing with operational patterns, and patterns can be predicted, intercepted, and terminated. History is not a collection of stories. It is a laboratory. Every empire built, every dynasty collapsed, every sovereign who rose and everyone who was removed, all of it is data. And the data has a pattern so consistent, so repeated across centuries and civilizations, that ignoring it is not naivety. It is a choice that has ended careers, dismantled legacies, and buried men who should have survived. The pattern is this: every leader who fell not because their enemy was stronger, but because they left a threat alive long enough for it to become one. Machiavelli's first law of survival. In The Prince, Niccolò Machiavelli wrote with a precision that made the comfortable deeply uncomfortable. Men must be either pampered or crushed, because they can get revenge for small injuries, but not for fatal ones. This was not a statement of cruelty. It was a statement of structural logic. A threat you injure without eliminating does not retreat. It recalibrates. It waits. It returns with the addition of motive, because now it has grievance. The half measure is not a compromise between aggression and mercy. It is the worst possible outcome. It costs you the goodwill of mercy and delivers none of the security of decisive action. Machiavelli did not advise cruelty for cruelty's sake. He advised it for the same reason a surgeon cuts. Because incomplete procedures do not heal, they infect. Caesar and the architecture of clemency. Julius Caesar is frequently cited as history's most famous practitioner of mercy, and history's most famous example of what unresolved threats produce. Caesar's clementia, his policy of pardoning defeated enemies, was a deliberate political instrument designed to project magnanimity and consolidate loyalty. It was strategically elegant. It was also fatally incomplete. He pardoned Brutus. He pardoned Cassius. He allowed men who had fought against him to re-enter his inner circle, his Senate, his proximity. Not because he was naive. Caesar was never naive, but because he miscalculated the variable that Machiavelli had already identified. A pardoned enemy is not a neutralized enemy. They are a motivated one, operating from inside your perimeter, with the additional fuel of personal obligation transformed into personal resentment. On the Ides of March, Caesar did not die because his enemies were powerful. He died because he left the threat architecture intact and called it peace. The Medici model, invisible elimination, where Caesar's error was visible mercy. The Medici family of Florence built one of history's most durable power structures on an entirely different doctrine, the elimination that never appears to be an elimination. Cosimo de' Medici, the patriarch, did not remove his threats through open confrontation. He removed them through economic isolation, strategic exile, and the careful dismantling of their alliances, all conducted with a smile in place and a handshake extended. His enemies did not fall publicly. They simply found that every door had quietly closed, every resource had silently rerouted, every ally had subtly recalibrated. By the time they understood what had happened, there was nothing left to fight with, and no one left to fight alongside. The Medici did not make enemies. They made former threats, people who had been thoroughly and invisibly defanged while the operation remained entirely deniable. This is the model, not theater, not aggression, architecture. The universal law across all eras. Pull back from the individuals and examine the pattern across every power structure in recorded history. Roman, Florentine, Ottoman, corporate, political. The sovereigns who endured shared a single operational policy. Threats were resolved completely, or they were not considered resolved. There was no middle category, no managed tension, no productive conflict. Either the threat no longer had the capacity to act against your interests, or it was still a threat, regardless of what agreements had been signed, or what peace had been declared. The men who built things that lasted understood something. The men who lost everything refused to accept. Sentiment is a luxury of the secure. Until your position is unassailable, every unresolved threat is a structural weakness, and structures with weaknesses do not survive pressure. They collapse under it, precisely when the pressure is highest and the cost of collapse is greatest. History is not asking you to be cruel. History is asking you to be accurate. Everything before this chapter was diagnosis. This chapter is the operation, and like any serious operation, it begins not with movement, but with stillness. The single most common error people make when they finally decide to act against a threat is that they act visibly, emotionally, with urgency that telegraphs their intentions and hands their enemy the one thing they needed most: warning. The first rule of the Elimination Architecture is absolute and non-negotiable. The threat must never know the operation has begun. The moment your threat detects movement against them, they activate their own defenses. They fortify relationships. They pre-position narratives. They begin constructing the version of events that casts them as victim and you as aggressor. You do not want to fight that battle. You want that battle to never become necessary, because you finished the operation before it could be framed as a conflict at all. The architecture operates across 4 sequential domains. Each domain must be addressed in order. Skipping a domain does not accelerate the process. It creates gaps, and gaps become the exact locations where operations collapse. Domain 1, information severance. Before any move is made, you cut the intelligence feed. Your threat's operational capacity depends entirely on their access to real-time information about you. Your plans, your vulnerabilities, your emotional state, your next position. Every person in your circle who has a connection to your threat is a potential conduit, not necessarily a deliberate one, simply a structural one. You do not announce this severance. You do not create drama around it. You quietly reclassify what you share, and with whom. Your plans become private. Your next moves become invisible. Your emotional reactions, particularly to things they have done, become completely unreadable. You are not going cold. You are going dark. There is a significant operational difference. Cold is visible. Dark is absent. Domain 2, social capital rerouting. Your threat has a network position. They have relationships, credibility, and perceived value inside the environments you share. You do not attack this directly. Direct attacks create sympathy for your target and suspicion toward you. Instead, you reroute the social capital flows that sustain their position. This means deepening your own relationships with the nodes that matter most, not against your threat, never against, simply toward your own consolidation. You become more present, more valuable, more irreplaceable inside the shared ecosystem. As your gravity increases, theirs diminishes by comparison, without you ever having referenced them once. The environment re-ranks them naturally. You simply accelerated the process through strategic investment in your own positioning. Domain 3, leverage mapping. Every threat has a structural dependency, something they need that is currently accessible because of their proximity to you or your network. Access, opportunity, referral, credibility, transfer, resource flow. You map these dependencies with surgical precision. You do not cut them immediately. You identify them, document them, and position yourself to control them when the moment arrives, and the architecture determines when that moment is. Not emotion. You withdraw the dependency cleanly, quietly, and completely, not as punishment, not as retaliation, simply as a reclassification of resource allocation. The result is the same. The framing is entirely different. Framing is everything. Domain 4, irreversible positioning. The final domain is the one that makes the operation permanent. A threat that has been socially diminished, informationally severed, and resource depleted will attempt recovery. They will seek new entry points, new allies, new angles of reapproach. The fourth domain closes these permanently, not through aggression, but through positioning yourself so completely beyond their reach that re-engagement becomes structurally impossible. This means elevation. You move to a level of position, credibility, and alliance where the threat no longer has the altitude to reach you, not because you pushed them down, but because you moved up far enough that the distance became insurmountable. The most elegant eliminations in history share this quality. The threat was not destroyed. They were simply left behind, permanently, by someone who outgrew the entire battlefield they were fighting on. The operational discipline, the architecture only works if all 4 domains are executed with complete emotional detachment. The moment personal feeling enters the operation, anger, satisfaction, the desire to be seen winning, the operation becomes visible. And visible operations invite resistance, narrative warfare, and the exact escalation you engineered this entire sequence to avoid. You are not settling a score. You are adjusting an environment. The outcome is identical. The posture is entirely different. One makes you a combatant. The other makes you a sovereign. Execute in silence. Finish completely. Move forward without announcement. The operation was never personal. It was simply necessary. You have been given the diagnosis. You have been given the architecture. You have been given the historical precedent and the operational framework. And if you stop here, if you take these tools and attempt to apply them to the identity you currently carry, you will fail. Not because the tools are flawed, because the hand holding them is. This is the chapter most people skip. It is the most uncomfortable chapter in any serious doctrine of power, because it does not ask you to change your behavior. It asks you to change your nature. And nature, unlike behavior, cannot be adjusted at the surface. It must be rebuilt from the foundation. The version of you that attracted the threat, tolerated the threat, mismanaged the threat, and waited too long to act against the threat. That version is not a phase you passed through. That version is a structural identity. It has a psychology, a set of default responses, a relationship with conflict, with self-worth, with what you believe you are permitted to protect, and how far you believe you are permitted to go in protecting it. And that identity is the single greatest liability you carry into every power environment you will ever enter. It must not be improved. It must be retired. The anatomy of the identity you are leaving behind. The identity that made you vulnerable shares common architecture across almost every man who has ever sat where you are sitting. It carries a deep, largely unconscious belief that likability is a form of protection, that if enough people think well of you, you are safe. This belief is not only wrong, it is inverted. Likability without power is not protection, it is an invitation. It signals availability, accessibility, and the absence of consequence. The men who are never threatened are not the most liked. They are the most costly to threaten. The retiring identity also carries an addiction to resolution, the need for conflict to have a clean ending, for relationships to return to warmth, for tension to dissolve into understanding. This addiction is what the appeasement loop feeds on. It is what keeps the operation from ever beginning, because beginning the operation means accepting that some conflicts do not resolve. They terminate, and termination requires you to be comfortable with permanent coldness towards someone you may have once valued. Finally, the retiring identity carries a quietly devastating habit. It seeks external permission to protect itself. It waits for the threat to become undeniable before acting. It needs the situation to be objectively, visibly, inarguably hostile before it feels justified in responding decisively. This waiting period is not caution. It is a permission structure you built for your enemies, a grace period they did not ask for and did not deserve, handed to them by a version of you that was more afraid of being wrong about someone than of being destroyed by them. That version served a purpose once. It is finished now. The architecture of the identity you are building. The replacement identity is not a performance of coldness. It is not an aesthetic of dominance. It is a functional restructuring of your operating defaults. It begins with a single foundational shift. You stop measuring your responses against what is socially acceptable and begin measuring them against what is strategically necessary. These two standards will sometimes align. When they diverge, you have already decided which one governs. The new identity carries what can only be described as comfortable distance, the ability to maintain warmth as a strategic instrument, while keeping your actual interior unreachable. You are present in every room. You are legible to no one. People feel your engagement without ever gaining access to your architecture. This is not coldness. This is sovereignty of interiority, the mastery of your own inner state as a protected resource. It carries decisive threat classification, the ability to identify, name, and categorize a threat at first contact, without the delay of benefit of the doubt, without the fog of emotional investment, without the social anxiety of being perceived as paranoid. You see clearly because you have removed the filters that were installed to make you manageable. And it carries what the retiring identity could never sustain: the willingness to finish, not to escalate, not to retaliate, but to complete an operation once begun, to see it through its full architecture without flinching, without softening, at the final step, without the last-minute mercy that has historically undone every sovereign who possessed it. The death that precedes the transition. There is a specific moment in this process that most men retreat from. It arrives when the new identity requires you to act against someone you still have residual feeling for, a former ally who converted, a relationship that mattered before it became a threat. The retiring identity will argue for one more conversation, one more extension of grace. one more opportunity for them to prove they deserved the benefit of the doubt, you never stopped giving. This argument is not compassion. It is the retiring identity's final defense mechanism, a last attempt to remain operational inside you by disguising self-preservation as virtue. You will recognize it now. You will name it for what it is, and you will proceed. The man you are becoming does not mourn the version of himself that made him vulnerable. He studies it once, extracts the structural lesson, and releases it without ceremony. There is no ritual here, no dramatic transformation, no announcement. You simply begin operating from the new architecture, consistently, quietly, completely. The environment around you will register the shift before you fully articulate it. People will begin to recalibrate how they approach you, not because you told them to, not because you performed anything, but because the signal you broadcast has changed. And the threats that once found you accessible will find, without explanation, that the entry points have disappeared. You did not become harder to threaten by threatening back. You became harder to threaten by becoming a different kind of structure entirely, one that was never built to absorb what they were offering. That is not a mindset shift. That is an identity replacement, and it is the last thing you will ever need to do once